You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific and how.
The episode opens with a kid getting beaten up by rogue barbells, but don't worry, our Kryptofreak this week isn't Meteor Rock enhanced exercise equipment, or even a ghost as Chloe briefly considers, but is in fact someone who can turn invisible, and seems to have it out for Lex's old flame, Victoria Hardwick, who we met last week. She's staying at the mansion because, despite her pretty obvious plan to distract Lex and get a foothold on Luthor, she's hot and British, and that's enough for Lex. Nah, I'm just kidding. He has something else up his sleeve. This isn't a guy who would knowingly let a girl hack into his computer without a plan, even if he is making out with her every act of the episode. But Lionel doesn't know this, and shows up to scold Lex for not catching on to her treachery, saying empires are not brought down by outside forces, they're destroyed from within. Lex says this isn't business, and Lionel disagrees, but we can tell Lex knows something we don't, and we'll have to wait until next episode to find out just what that is. For a lot of the episode, it seems like the invisible psycho in question is Amy, daughter of Lex's housekeeper, who's so obsessed with Lex she collects newspaper and magazine clippings of him and steals the watch his mother gave him before she died. She's creepy and socially awkward, but at least this is a stalker we can understand. I mean, Lex is actually awesome, and the scripts don't have to keep trying to convince us of this, like they so often do with Lana. But as much as she hates Victoria, it turns out she's not the invisible girl. It turns out to be her brother, Jeff. Well, not that he's a girl, but that he's invisible. Who is a walking metaphor for the, quote, invisibility of servants who work for rich people, and thanks to the all-seeing powers of universal irony, he conveniently found a kryptonite-laden plant that he could use to make himself invisible. He's the one who blacklight graffitied one of the rooms in Lex's mansion and attacked Victoria in her bathtub, all for his sister who's in love with Lex. And when that doesn't scare her off, he goes after Lex to get retribution for Lex refusing her advances, even though, as Lex says, that kind of love could get me arrested. After he knocks Lex conveniently unconscious, Clark's free to take him out in just a couple minutes. Invisibility might be a tough thing to combat if you're Batman. For Clark, all it takes is X-ray vision, and he's easily brought down. Meanwhile, Clark has decided nearly halfway through the first season is probably a good time to start actually doing things. So when he sees that Lana and Whitney are on the outs, he takes a page out of Lex's book and makes his move, offering to help organize the blood drive she's working on and inviting her to watch the sunset from his loft. Where else? He's really scoring a lot of points and nearly kisses her until Nell walks in because her whole role in this show is to ruin everyone else's good time. But alas, he finds himself taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back when he finds out the reason Whitney's been so distant with Lana. His father's on heart medication and is deathly ill. Clark ultimately decides to do the right thing and doesn't take advantage of the situation, but it, of course, puts him into an emo funk at the end that compels him to pose for a Twilight poster. Then credits. We have, in a lot of ways, a fairly typical Kryptofreak this week, but 2 really good moves are made to integrate him better into the episode than some of his predecessors. First, he doesn't come in and steal the episode. We don't spend a lot of time with him away from the characters who are supposed to be our protagonists, and even when we think his sister Amy might be the Kryptofreak, we don't follow her around too much either. We get just enough screen time from the both of them to understand their motives and to get what the episode is trying to thematically do with them. If the Freak of the Week isn't going to be a real fleshed out character we want to know more about, like Earl Jenkins and Jitters, then this is the way to go. Amy's not altogether unsympathetic, and her unhealthy teenage crush and social awkwardness is actually pretty believable. Jeff's motivations are a little less clear. It's somewhat hard to buy that a guy would go homicidal just to get back at someone for not paying attention to his sister. Maybe for hurting his sister, but not ignoring her. On the other hand, it's pretty evident that this is an excuse to take his own feelings of insecurity and inadequacy out on an easy target, Lex Luthor, the man who represents the social class system he feels beats him and his family down, so that the world doesn't even see them as people. So they both come off as more believable than they might have been had the episode given them more screen time. I also like that Victoria's arrival, set up last episode, is a plausible reason for something like this to happen now, as opposed to any other time during this family's residence on Lex's property. Smallville sometimes struggles to plausibly explain why certain threats present themselves at the time they do, and they therefore come off as too coincidental. The other thing that's done to incorporate Amy and Jeff well into the episode is by making a real mystery out of who the Kryptofreak is, rather than most of the others we've gotten, where we know all the way from the teaser, and we still have to follow Clark and Chloe around as they try to figure it out. Here, Amy's presented like a Kryptofreak, and we really have no reason to believe it's not her until the 3rd act. At the precise moment there's a question as to whether she's the attacker, of course, it's pretty obvious it's her brother, but I still give the episode props for this, mainly because it goes a little against the regular, tired formula. I love these early Lex-Lionel exchanges. Lionel shows up for one scene, and the dialogue is so well crafted and it's so well acted, I'm wishing there was a whole lot more of it. The way these two throw lines back and forth is like watching a tennis match, except you're never entirely sure who the victor is at the end. Lionel seems to have a point, Victoria has ulterior motives for being there, and Lex seems to just be in it for the sex. And Lex wants his father to think that, because what he has planned will score him major points with Lionel if it works. So he says it's not business, and then lets his father get furious at him for patronizing him. Lionel says, Smallville is your test. Right now, you're failing. But Lex's expression says, that's what you think. And again, we see a great dichotomy in how Clark and Lex handle themselves and their fathers. Clark tries to impress his father, generally by trying to do the right thing. He doesn't even go to Jonathan for advice here when he decides not to take advantage of the situation with Lana and Whitney. He just does it because of his upbringing, despite how much it hurts him to do it. Whereas Lex tries to impress his father by defying him, though we don't see the end of that here. This is a subplot that continues past this episode. Both of them have fundamental behaviors from their fathers that are second nature to them now, and both wishes he had a little more of his friend in him. When Clark tells Lex about Whitney's dad and how prior to this he wanted to make a move with Lana, he asks Lex what he would do. Lex says, without hesitation, I'd go for it. But see, that's what I like about you, Clark. You wouldn't. And the look on Clark's face says, I was afraid you'd say that. Like Clark wishes he had it in him to just be deceptive to get what he wants, but he doesn't. And Lex's line tells us he wishes he had it in him to do the right thing despite what he wants, but he doesn't have that in him either. This is great stuff. This is actually an episode that focuses on a love triangle that kind of works. It's not amazing or anything, but then again, I don't generally care about love triangles. A lot of times, love triangles, especially in this show, are just about two people fighting over another person and those cliche moments where one walks in on the other two and gets angry but just mopes around rather than doing anything about it. Here, Clark's proactive, finally ready to make his move. But what if the reason they're on the outs is because Whitney's having problems at home, and he really needs Lana's support, but he doesn't want to burden her with his problems and remind her of the deaths of her own parents? Well, maybe now it's a lot less ethical to move in. This is a real conflict, and Clark makes an admirable choice. Somehow this feels more heroic than all of his easy saves when he stopped all those Kryptofreaks before. I like Clark having to lie about not being able to give blood. That's a realistic thing that he'd definitely deal with at some point or another. Nobody comes out and explains, well, his blood is alien and we can't have anyone looking at it under a microscope, because the reasoning is clear and it doesn't need explanation. It's also a good little scene for Clark and Jonathan, when Jonathan says, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I guess you can't always be honest with people. Have I ever mentioned before that Nell sucks? She walks out on the porch just when Clark and Lana are about to finally have their first kiss under the pretense that it's late and it's time for Clark to go home. Really? Because we've seen Lana and Whitney on the porch together in the middle of the night several times, and even at the end of this episode. Now you could say, well, Nell knows Lana and Whitney are dating and she's stepping in so Clark doesn't do something stupid. But Nell's proven time and again that she's a selfish, shallow jerk who's obsessed with her own image. And my guess is she does this because Lana dating the star quarterback looks a lot better to her friends than dating the farm boy next door. Her whole function in the show seems to be to usurp everyone else's happiness if it makes her smile a little. Clark even mentions that she and Jonathan used to date, and Lana makes it sound like she took the breakup really hard. Oh, so that's why she dissed Martha in the pilot when she said tulips are an uncomplicated flower. Gee, I wonder why things with her and Jonathan didn't work out. I've got a lot of words for this lady, but unfortunately Geekvolution is an all-ages channel, and I can't use any of them. Once again, Lana's a tad shallow, though she's not Nell bad. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this one scene, but the romantic moment just before Nell shows up is made less so by the end of the string of "you're the one who" lines Lana gives to justify why she's about to kiss him. You're the one who cares, etc. The last one is, you're the one who's here. Wow, really? I get she probably means that Whitney doesn't seem to care about her activities and Clark does, and he's more emotionally available because of that, but it just comes off wrong. What if they were both there? How would she decide which one to choose? I think that would be really telling of her personality, by the way. Given what we knew about Whitney before this episode, I mean, now he's finally being shown in a more human light, but before, in what scenario could Lana choose Whitney over Clark and she wouldn't seem entirely shallow? And also, keep in mind that we've had 2 episodes recently where she's gotten angry with Clark for not being there, and that seems to be her justification for staying with Whitney and not considering leaving him for Clark, who she obviously has feelings for. So taking all that into consideration, it really does come off as, well, you're here, and I feel like making out, so it might as well be you. Again, I know that's not what's intended, but it kind of feels that way, at least in the scene. The writers are also still making it pretty painfully obvious that they don't know what to do with this character in the long run. Clark says, "I think it's amazing how you do all these different things," referring to the blood drive. And Lana responds with, "I'm just trying to find my place in the world." That's sadly ironic, considering how, season after season, this show can't seem to find a place for her anywhere. And questions to ask Jor-El when I get to heaven: is Clark smarter than the average human? A couple episodes back, we had that scene where it looked like Clark was a math genius, which never seems to be brought up again. And now he has a super memory. He knows exactly when and where Amy is getting her blood drawn just off the top of his head from the work he did with Lana. Chloe's really surprised by this, and so am I. Again, this doesn't seem to come up much after this, and as I've said before, I still suspect Clark was eventually made dumber to make Chloe look smarter. How does being invisible make you a master swordsman? Invisible Jeff swings a sword around like a pro, then throws it, it flips a couple times, and then narrowly misses Lex's head by inches. Where did this poor kid, no one ever pays any attention to, learn to do that? And now let's go over to the scoreboard. We've got one Kryptofreak this week. This time it's Jeff Palmer, not Amy Palmer, whose villain motivation is he wants retribution for his sister not getting illegal love from Lex Luthor, and he gets his power from kryptonite plants he rubs all over his body. We've got one instance of Clark being affected by green kryptonite, I think, in the locker room during the teaser. Now, he looks kind of sick to his stomach, and Pete even asks him if he's okay, and then we see the invisible guy beat up the kid in the locker room. Now, my assumption at that point is that Clark was affected by the kryptonite on his body, but he isn't anywhere else in the episode. So, it's either kryptonite or he ate something bad for lunch. We've got one instance of somebody walking away from a conversation angry. That's when Lana and Whitney are arguing in the beanery. We've got one instance of Clark and Lana in the loft. That's the sunset scene. We've got one instance of Clark in bullet time when he gets hit with a mace. And we've got one instance of somebody being conveniently unconscious so that they don't see Clark being super. And that's Lex during Clark's fight with Jeff. This is a pretty average episode, elevated a little by some great Clark and Lex moments, and by Clark doing something genuinely admirable. I'm going to give Shimmer a 3 out of 4. Was there an item I missed in any category? Send me a personal message on Geekvolution on YouTube, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.